Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randy Baier. We'll discuss books that Rip Rap has received, including those in the biotechnology of android robots and in helping Alzheimer patient caregivers. Welcome to Rip Rap, Randy.
Glad to be here again.
Yeah, this first book is kind of an interesting one. It's the story on android robots.
How to Build an Android. Philip K. Dick's Robotic Resurrection. The true story of Philip K. Dick's Robotic Resurrection.
It was a really interesting book because I'm not much into the robotic world, but I became aware of how complex it is when I was reading that they got it to the point where they carried on conversations with this robot. And they have specialists that he thanks in his acknowledgments for, the ones that did the neck muscles and all kinds of ways they had to program the artificial intelligence, because my impression is that when you're talking, it would try to mimic how human beings react. So it goes to an area that deals with that, tries to find some kind of way of responding to it. So they go through all this stuff, including making a full-size robot that looked human, based on this Philip Dick, who's a sci-fi writer.
Well, he wrote this book called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? He's written many, many books, but the movie Blade Runner was based on the Philip K. Dick novel. And I think that's where the pun, so to speak, of the title, not from Blade Runner, but from the original book, because the lead in the story falls in love with an android woman in the story. This is the story of the renegades who are coming from off planet to come back and wreak havoc in the world. And there's this cop played in the movie by Harrison Ford in the Blade Runner Ridley Scott movie, but he falls for one of the androids who are guarding the sort of the Moloch. They're the corporation she works for, the corporation that controls all the androids in the
There's all
world.
these details that this fascinated me. For example, one of the issues of robots is to get an expressive face.
Internally, you do a sort of psychic commitment to say, well, this thing looks like me a little bit, so I'll commit to communicating with it in some way. It's kind of interesting. I mean, I've tried to communicate eye to eye with interspecies communication, and a dog is, you can get pretty close. You raise your eyebrow, you get it, you feel like you're communicating. Start doing it with a cat or a chicken or a fish, and it's like, if there's communication going on, it doesn't happen like in some cases in the facial realm. With a cat, of course, it does, but not. I don't think the level of it does with, say, a dog. And I've never worked closely with with apes and chimpanzees, other primates, so I don't know what that it's actually like. I bet it's really, really close. You can make that kind of connection. So we're always trying to do this, make that interspecies leap
Without understanding its demands.
Right, yeah.
And its requirements.
And that's, if you go back to the novel, that's the core fascination of the novel. And in the end, the detective, the hero of the story, there are two heroes. The woman he falls for, and she falls for him, but she's destined to go back, to be cut off. I mean, the robots have a life, and the life disappears. Then they go back. They're killed.
Isn't there a point where robots can think to a certain extent?
That's it. This character thinks through the problem of how to the crimes that are going on and whatnot, and realizes that she's part of this enormous hegemonic corporation that's controlling everything everybody does, and she breaks away. And that means she's thinking. She figures it out, and she's a robot. That's what's really cool about it.
I haven't done a whole lot of reading on this, but it seems to me that it's that same thing of you create your own destruction. In other words, at the point where you've created a robot who can think for itself.
Yeah, herself.
And create. See, the thing is, to create means you have to pull together things in a nonlinear way and construct a different
critical
thing.
thinking.
Yeah. But once they can do that, then
it's over. Yeah, I mean, it's over.
Except the supplies and, the limitations like we talked about.
Somebody can just turn the switch.
Yeah.
So it's
interesting.
It's really fascinating. This was interesting to talk about. Should we talk about more books?
Yeah, the justice for kids is a real issue, and we just had the shooting in Ohio, and I don't have a clear idea of why the kid shot the place up.
Well, it's so hard to tell from the popular media. I mean,
but there are indications that I've seen that he was being bullied, and one was
by other kids,
by the other kids at the school, and so he just went nuclear and got his uncle's gun and went and shot the place up.
Well, this apparently was an issue also with the young man who shot the college students at Virginia Tech, that he had been troubled by.
Well, I've done some reading on that one, and that one I think he was autistic, and no one have really put it together. But his own grandmother said that when he was young, he had the blank affect face, and that also, of autism.
Right.
And with autistic people, they don't show what they're going through.
Yeah.
Even though they were going through it.
But he was 20 or 21. This is about kids. And this boy in Ohio was 16 and about to be tried as an adult.
They're going to throw the book at him.
Yeah.
But no one really understands what happens.
Well, did they understand about the Columbine kids as well? I mean, these guys mimicked this kind of dark, gothic, gangster kind of long leather coats, guns, this kind of very dark behavior.
Well, he didn't show the Virginia Tech guy didn't show that, but he did, get into the whole thing, of being pretty dogged about, what he was going to do.
Yeah.
The trouble was that he was known to have these struggles.
Right. A lot of faculty members had actually asked him and mentioned.
Actually, someone who teaches writing, it was an English professor who reported him to the chair, who then brought it to the university's attention. The university took it to court. The court mandated therapy, which he didn't have the money to get, and so then everything just went from that point. This one, though, the Ohio one, is troubling because it's still not clear what happened. But the concern is with kids, I think that when kids are shooting other kids or doing violent acts, which is what this book deals with, Justice for Kids, edited by Nancy Dowd, we have a really troubled society. And the issue is then, in terms of the justice system, what do you do? How can you treat these kids? Like you said,
we're talking very young kids, not 15, 16,
the whole range,
17.
the whole range, yeah.
Almost adults, but
because there's kids that I call children of chaos. They never got parenting. I have a student whose sister was addicted on crack when she delivered her baby, so the Child Protective Services.
The baby was a crack baby.
Yeah. So Child Protective Services took away all 4 kids and gave them to my student, who had her own 2-year-old. So now she has the equivalent of
5
triplets of 2-year-olds because her sister had twins who were 2 years old. But the point is that her sister was addicted on crack and had the baby, which is brain damage, for the baby. It's a real serious issue. And you don't know if there's cognitive damage till much later after you can really test it.
Right.
But what do you do with kids who are that far out of the loop? Do you treat them as juveniles? I mean, if they've just murdered someone in cold blood, do you treat them as juveniles? In our current legal system, they get up to be 17, 18 years old and they're released.
They have, right. And they have a disability in a sense, but they still can commit a crime of such seriousness that it just destroys lives. But they have the inability to see. I mean, if you're, okay, I don't know the book, so I'm coming at this with the sort of the bleeding heart liberal historical tradition of trying to understand. And if it is possible to say, I think, that somebody does not see a moral line in the sand between taking another's life or even the point where violence, but physically, mentally, they don't have
they can't have remorse because
they don't know the difference. It's like there's no gene in there that's telling them.
It's not a gene. They have no moral code. No one has shown them.
But sometimes that's physical, like in the case of a addicted baby who's brain damaged. What I'm saying is it's something almost like
there
a
is
brain
true.
damage.
You have true sociopaths who literally have an organic inclination toward violence. They just there's something wrong in their brain. They short circuit and
what
they
do we do about those when they're children and when they're adults? Because they clearly harm people.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Right.
Do you color your judgment based on the sociopathic kids toward all kids? Because these are kids.
Right.
And what you're trying to do is have people lead productive lives.
Right. Right.
Or, do you take the seriousness of it and deal with that? I think one of the more distressing things is that overall our prison system no longer seeks recuperation or rehabilitation.
Right.
They're just there and do the time, and so then you get into racist groups, drugs, abusive behaviors, homosexual behaviors, all that stuff. So they're brutalized by the time they get out of whatever prison system they're in, which means it's not a solution at all. So it's a real troubling thing. And in this country, I've read before that our prison population, adult prison, is 2.2 million a day. Every day of the year, we have 2.2 million people, and part of that is the so-called war on drugs.
It's like the banks having the average daily balance, right?
Yeah, right. And so we're paying it's the largest number of imprisoned citizens of any other country in the world.
It's true, and it's also so completely imbalanced as far as people of color, Black, Latino, young, age group, the demographic, 18 to 30 or whatever, 35. That's tragic. How is this played out in this book, though, in terms of the subtitle is "Keeping Kids Out of the Juvenile Justice System." So, what are the options in terms of these?
Well, I
serious
think that's
crimes?
where, if you're more proactive, the trouble is that the agencies like Child Protective Services should be more proactive, but they're overwhelmed. Just absolutely. Here in the state of Michigan, we have 60,000 kids waiting to go into foster homes because there's not enough foster homes. So if you would turn that around and you have foster homes, you have Child Protective Services that could intervene and try for some other kind of thing. You have more monitoring of it. And also just of the whole interaction of custody. I have a lot of students who have horrible custody issues, where one of my students just this past week, the father showed up. I think he lives north of South Carolina. He's been drug-free for 11 months, comes up and starts using and abusing, and just really distraught, made his daughter really upset because she knew what that meant. He's going back to jail. But that's all this custody stuff, and abuse and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think there is any perfect answer. I think it does help to do the research to find out the magnitude of the problem and what could be done. But it's really out of control.
Yeah, it's really
There's
true.
one book that I want to get to here.
Good.
Because it's Peter Beinart's The Crisis of Zionism. And Israel, to me, is taught like the third rail in American political life. If you say anything against Israel, you're in a whole pile of trouble.
Well, it was just the thing today on the New York Times or the Washington Post, I get a little blurb. It was Obama reestablishing his, backup. We have your back, so to speak.
In terms of Iran.
Iran, and yeah, I guess general Israeli.
Because they're concerned that
politics.
Israel's just going to go over and bomb Iran.
Yeah.
And they want to do it right now.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying.
It's so hard to tell because I can't tell if this is a something that is inflamed, I guess is the way to put it, by the way the press focuses on the black and white aspect of, Iran is on the side of darkness in the United States, and Israel sort of on the side of right. And there's so much more subtlety to it. I don't follow what goes on between the threats that Iran being obviously much closer, geopolitically to Israel. But I don't know that dialogue. Are they actually making real threats? Israel apparently seems to be saying, sure, these are real threats. We don't.
Well,
kowtow to
Iran
that sort
has
of
just
stuff.
consistently made progress toward, energizing the fuel, the radioactive fuel, could make bombs or energy. The United States and Israel and other people in the area are quite concerned that it would become a nuclear bomb, and then we're off to another race altogether. And one thing that Obama just made the position that there's this concept of containment, and he's not seen. In other words, if Iran was to make a nuclear bomb, then it'd just be an issue of containing it. And he's dismissed that as an option. That, if they get definitive evidence that Iran has made a nuclear bomb, they're going to go over and bomb them, And it's just terrific. But there's another element with this book that kind of plays into this. And that is, when Israel began, it was this whole hope of a dream state that would safeguard the Jewish people and cherish democratic ideals. But it's so easy to step over the line, go into the zealot version of that. And that's what the concern of, as I said, young American Jews, of what's happening with Israel. It's no longer doing that. Now it's stepped over the line, and it's representing a danger. This kind of Zionism is representing a danger to Israeli democracy and the American Jewish establishment's refusal to confront it. And that's that thing. At what point is it becoming toxic?
Yeah.
What point is what the dream was has now become the evil, because of the excess? And I think that's what I'm saying in American political life. It's the third rail. On subways, you have that third rail. You touch that, and bap, you're done. And that's because I think the depth of the commitment to help Israel in this country by many, many politicians who also get a lot of money from Israel for their political campaigns.
Well, the United States has suffered through, zealots in power as well. Not just on this particular crisis, but certainly on, in the past 10 years, we've had, our own zealots in terms of the actions in against Al Qaeda and in Afghanistan and certainly Iraq, and now in Afghanistan. It's gotten to be almost it seems like we don't know why we went. It seems.
But if you just take what Israel has already done, and I respect the fact that you have two people trying to live in the same place, and they hate each other apparently. But
this is the thing that I think about with the media. I wonder how much both the right and the left will say the media inflames this entirely. But you got to look, I think, at who owns the media and what message are they telling us. I mean, even when you listen to the liberal, I call it the liberal media, and I'm not a right-winger, but you listen to the PBS news stories or the public access station news stories, as opposed to, say, the AM radio or the commercial FM
Fox
stations,
News.
Fox News or MSNBC or even CNN. You wonder what aspect of the story are they deciding to push today, and what's the subtlety behind the real goings on. I mean, and you look at that in our own context with when we were rushing to war with Iraq after 2000 and after the in the years right after 2009/11, 2001. It was the press was complicit. Really, there were people in the press objecting to the sort of the calls for war, but the zealots had the upper hand, and they convinced. Now, it's a different situation, obviously, and it's a different threat. But I just keep wondering how true is the threat.
At what point does it cross the line? Because if you read about what's happened in Palestine, Israel has set up the fence.
Yeah.
And it's gerrymandered it for its own convenience.
Yeah.
So there's people in Palestine, in the West Bank, that can't get to relatives on the other side of the fence.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
they have to go so far out of their way,
Right.
or their credentials, the requirements for credentials.
They're not local anymore.
So
Right.
that's starting to look like a pretty
But
fascist
historically, people did, yeah, and you can't use that word when you're talking about people are, over time, have lived in that basin together. And it seems like, it's at the point now where you can't go back to 1948 and unrefugee the refugees. It's like, because the camps have become, but you can do an awful lot to rectify the situation.
But they seem to, it's like a dogfight or something. They just keep going back and forth, bombing each other.
Yeah.
But there's something really troubling when you've done some of the stuff that Israel has done. Not that the Palestinians are
No, exactly.
completely guilt-free.
Right.
But it's just
But the
troubling.
zealots
At
have
what
been-
point are you... It's parallel to our thing with the 9/11 thing. At what point do you become so provoked? Do you set up what's called emergency rules that then become a martial state?
Yeah.
Right. And that's been the debate about keep doing the Patriot Act.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Well, now
the whole thing with Homeland
they just passed
Security
that law
and
now that they can go and kill Americans, even domestic. If they feel that without any trial they can do this. So, but I think the other thing that I'm concerned about is the easy rhetoric that the Republicans are going through about overstating things and really going bizarre. Making these totally
Yes.
over-the-top statements. And while they may play out okay, I guess, in a primary thing, it's troubling in terms of discourse for the country. What are we doing? We're vilifying, demonizing people instead of trying to really carry on a true dialogue about what the needs of the country are.
Yeah.
And that just really bothers me. But this book is just coming out now, and Clinton...
I'm sorry to interrupt. I take it he is on this. He is the side of critique of the zealots, right?
Yeah. He's associate professor of journalism and political science at City University of New York.
Well, doesn't he also edit the New Republic? Peter Baier?
No, I don't think so.
I thought maybe he did at one point.
He is a senior fellow at the New America Foundation.
Okay.
And lives in New York. And this is a serious book, but I mean, like I said, I have to admire his courage at taking this on, because this is the third rail of,
Well, the other thing is, I have some close friends who are in a coalition of a Jewish-Palestinian coalition of action. I guess you'd call it rational action to try to settle the differences between the two camps, Israel and Palestine, and they work very closely together. So they're on the sort of liberal progressive end of Israeli politics, and it's really a struggle just to work in the context of the progressive, non-progressive politics in Israel, trying to get that message out.
There's another aspect of this, and that is that he's part of the Jewish diaspora, and that's troubling. In other words, this guy, Baier.
Yeah.
And that's troubling him
I've seen
because
him interviewed on television quite a bit.
That's troubling him because when Israel began, it was everybody, all Jews would have equal standard in terms of the state.
Yeah.
But in 1967, Israel began taking a turn from that principle, and in the next generation, he says, we'll learn if it can find its way back. But they've turned away from the value of those who do not live in the intensity of that kitchen of heat. And so that's what really is troubling him. He says the struggle to help the Jewish state return to its founding ideals is not a struggle for Israelis alone. It's a struggle that calls all Jews, because Israel is the great test of Judaism in our time. If Israeli democracy falls, it will fall for all of us. No matter where we live, we will spend our lives sifting through the political, ethical, and theological rubble.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I thought, particularly with this huge, heated debate about what's going on in terms of Iran and Israel, like Netanyahu is meeting with Obama as we speak. It came especially in the United States because some of the commentators think that they want to just go and bomb Iran, you know. So,
well, we've built in the concept of preemptive strike as a legitimate aspect of, you know, just war now, since Bush sort of justified it for Iraq. It's now built in, and I mean, it seems to me that Obama seems to be taking on some of that belief structure.
well, he had to convince them that, you know, he would act, so he said that he doesn't bluff. And he was addressing Israel, you know. This other book is Green Alternatives, a National Energy Strategy, The Facts Behind the Headlines by Philip G. Gallman. And I love this.
The segue is we need a green nuclear bomb.
That's right. So he's talking about how the United States is facing, and other industrialized countries, are facing a growing energy crisis. Demand is increasing, but limited resources of conventional reserves of conventional sources of energy are drying up.
Yeah.
I don't even think that's the most obscene thing. The most obscene thing is that people on Wall Street speculating in oil.
Exactly, and the consumption seems to be increasing.
Well, because you got India, China coming in now.
The American patterns of consumption, it's really something. I mean, I remember when it was 30 or 40 years ago, it was the 70s, when greening was actually, you know, part of, in some ways, law.
Well, we've done another riprap.
This is wonderful. You covered 4 books, and we had about 10 or 15 to bite into, depending on the choices.
Yeah. So thank you for being a riprap.
Wait around for I'll wait around for the next time.